Yes, we are live. 6:57 on the dot. How's everybody doing tonight? Tonight we're going to be talking about some cool stuff. If you took a look at the thumbnail that I put up, it's very cool. So we're going to talk about that tonight. What it is a custom blower kit that we had to do kind of out of necessity on a Honda B series motor. I had run way back, we had run a VORTECH on a bunch of stuff on a bunch of B series Hondas, including going out and trying to set some land speed records with that stuff. And if you've seen any of the VORTECH kits for the B series way back in the day, for the B series Honda stuff that VORTECH did, they had a jack shaft. So they would drive it off of off the damper, and then have a jack shaft sending over the blower. The blower was mounted kind of over where the distributor is, and then right attached to the blower was an air to water intercooler, aftercooler, you can call it whatever you want, then going into the throttle body. The jack shaft seemed to work well. We were a little concerned about the spline strength for the kind of blower that we wanted to use, because we wanted to mount something bigger than, I think it was a V9G or something that they were using on those kits. And we tried a number of things with the standard setup the way that it was, because it was a cool kit, and I applaud them for packaging that and making all that work. It was pretty cool. We tried different blower pulleys, obviously, and different crank pulleys. And then we even ended up, what I ended up doing was we machined the factory Honda damper, and then I put a 6-rib pulley from I think it was a 4.6 Mustang, and bolted that with a little bit of machining, and that worked out good. So we could have a much bigger crank pulley. And then the problem was we eventually got to a point where we were kind of running out of blower. And also the 6-rib, we could go to an 8-rib to make that work. Because the other thing that's happening is we're running a lot of engine speed. Obviously, 8,000 or 8,500. And we wanted more supercharger. So I think the blower on there is probably like an S trim or something, because we were trying to get something near 500 or more at the tire back then. And so what we came up with, my friend Bernie Van Hammond designed that piece. And the cool thing about it is that you can see that it has the factory B series air conditioning bracket there. And then I think that's the AC. I don't think that's the power steering. I think that's the AC. And then he made a bracket that mounted the blower, and then it was braced and stuff. And then that bracket, basically the bracket that was holding the blower on, had a plate on it, and then that bolted to the AC thing. And I think we machined the AC plate a little bit too, to make sure that it was flat and even and all that. And that bolted on. But the nice thing about it, you can see, is that we cured a couple of problems. One, we could put essentially whatever blower that we wanted on that was sized. I mean, we would never run a YSI, or we would never try to do 1,000 horsepower with that, because just driving the blower was difficult enough. And we'll get into what that problem was. But one of the problems we eliminated was belt slippage. So we didn't have to worry about, and normally what happened with belt slippage is it would be running fine up into some RPM, and then you'd get up at 7,000 or 7,500, and then just all the boost would go away. It was a terrible feeling, because that's where it's really making boost and really making power. So when it would slip, obviously that was not a good thing. So if you notice on this assembly, we made a cog belt for it. And the cog belt setup did two things. One, cog belt's not going to slip, because if it does, you're going to destroy the belt. We didn't have to worry about that. It also made the belt shorter, so we didn't have a lot of like sine waves in the belt and a lot of chordal action and stuff going on. So we didn't have to worry about the belt flopping around and having, trying to stop an unsupported length with tensioners and things like that. So this short belt made life a lot better. We had a tensioner idler deal there, and that worked out good. The one flaw in this, and it's not a design flaw in the setup, is it was actually more of a design flaw in the Honda, and that's that it had the keyway for the crank that was holding the damper on was now taking all of the load of the blower. The damper is not a press fit on the Honda; it's a slip fit, and then with a bolt that's super tight. The problem was that we kept shearing the keyways. Now, the way to cure that is we could have and should have just pinned the other side of it. I kept back then thinking, okay, well, now we've got to take this thing apart and rebroach the crank and then broach the pulley, and that would have been, you know, an awful lot. Now, knowing what we know to pin that, it would have been life would have been a lot easier. As a matter of fact, I probably would have put 4 pins, you know, 3 more pins on, so it had a total of 4. So we didn't ever have to worry about that. And then we naturally had a big bypass valve on it to eliminate the surging during decel and stuff, which could have caused a problem. But and then we ended up using and honestly, now in thinking back, we probably were we might have been getting near the, because I think we ended up making 520 at the tire or something like that with this blower and this setup with the VORTECH aftercooler. And I think that we probably were getting kind of up close to the flow limit of that intercooler setup. Obviously, it was never designed for what we were doing with it. And that's the same core that they use in like the Mustang deal. And I think in the 4.6 and some of the other stuff, because it's a common core size for them to use. And I remember doing the testing on I think we did it on 351. And we get to a point which was about 600 horsepower or so, where that thing was fairly restrictive. We replaced it with a bigger intercooler, air-to-water intercooler from the guys at CX Racing. And we picked up a lot of flow and a lot of power. So I didn't know it back then because we thought, oh, it's a Honda, it's a big VORTECH, you know, it's a big intercooler, it's designed for a V8, it should work fine, right? Well, now looking back, it probably was, you know, we probably could have had even more power if we had a good cooler and stuff on there. But this setup worked fairly well. And so, you know, shout out to Bernie for for doing all this work back in the day. It was a good system and it made a lot of power, and the car went really fast. And then, you know, after a while, just like what I did with my with the Focus and with the little D16 Civic, after you have a supercharger on there for a while and then you put a turbo on there, you're like, oh yeah, that's this is kind of what it should be like. And even more so with the VORTECH, and nothing against the VORTECH, it worked really good, it was efficient, the charge air was really good, all that was worked good. But a centrifugal supercharger, especially when you're combining it with a Honda engine that's not notorious for torque. I mean, its specific torque output is fairly good, and it has a really, really broad torque curve because of the VTEC. So it's the torque curve is kind of flat and goes for a long ways, and then jumps up a little bit under VTEC and goes flat for a long ways, which is why it makes power, you know, out at 7,500 or 8,000. And so it's actually pretty good, but it's not like, you're not going to feel it like you do a V8. And then the VORTECH doesn't add a whole bunch of boost until you're at maximum engine speed. So it has a rising boost curve. So if you get in the throttle at 2,000 RPM or 3,000 RPM on a VORTECH supercharged B series Honda, it just doesn't feel that impressive because there's nothing, there might only be 1 or 2 pounds there. And it's not, you know, 2 pounds will help it a bit, but not like at the end, let's say at the end you have 10 or 12 pounds. Well, if you had 10 or 12 pounds down here, you'd really feel something. And that's kind of more what the turbos would do on the B series stuff, is when you would get them to spool up, and that's going to be a function of sizing and the NA power output and the displacement and all that. But when you'd get them to spool up, they would just make a lot more average power. And that came into play when I did the Bonneville deal, because when you're doing Bonneville, you're not concerned about boost response. You can put a big turbo on it, and we did, and we had less back pressure than boost pressure, and we had lots of charge cooling, and everything worked out really good. But the one thing that it really did was, with the VORTECH, we had to be careful about the gear split, because when you would shift from one gear to another, whatever the percentage drop was from one gear to another, we dropped down that much RPM. So then we have to pull from that RPM up to where we were really making power and making boost on the VORTECH. So if you shifted at, like, let's say with our gearing that we had, if you shifted out of 4th and into 5th at like 160 miles an hour, you know, you might drop down into not very far above VTEC. So even if you did it at, like, let's say if you shifted from 8,500 and you drop down to 6,000 RPM, at 6,000, it's not making anywhere near as much boost as it makes at 8,000 or 8,500. But with the turbo, that's not the case. So you have another 50 or 100 foot-pound, probably more like 50 or 60 or something like that, but maybe not quite 100, but depending on the boost level, it could be that much. So you have a lot more torque in that RPM range when you go to shift gears. So now it's much easier for the thing to pull from whatever that starting RPM is. Because for us, when we were running Bonneville in the Civic, the only gear that really mattered in this thing was fifth gear, because that's where we were freight training, and that's where eventually we would get our peak speed. And we couldn't put all of the power down that we had. It was a lot easier with the VORTECH, but we couldn't put down all the power that we had. Like, we couldn't go to full throttle, and especially with the turbo stuff, in any of the other gears. It had an open diff. It had a tire that was about this thin because we're getting rid of drag. And that combination plus a loose surface, which the Salt is, it would just spin the tire. We couldn't go to wide open throttle until the end of fourth gear, until the car was going 150 or 160 miles an hour. That at the very end of fourth gear is when especially with the turbo, where I could finally go like full throttle for a little bit and then shift into fifth. And then what we would do is, and especially with the VORTECH, is we would extend the shift RPM in fourth gear. So instead of shifting at 8,000, we would be 8,500 or 86 or 87 or 88. The problem is, and I was always, and I don't know if this is superstitious or whatever, I know a lot of guys rev these motors, but I didn't like going over 8,700 or so with this. And I think that it served me well, because that motor set lots and lots of records. We went out to Bonneville with it a bunch, and the thing kept going and worked very well. And I would always come home with a motor intact that was running and working. And that's better than, that's way better than going out and blowing up a motor. Even if you get the record up, I ended up doing that, not blowing the motor up, but we took the half shaft out of the trans, and the car spun, and I had to pull a chute, and all, it was all kinds of exciting ride. But the motor was fine, which was good news, because I didn't have a lot of money to try to fix it. And it was a good motor. It was a just sub 2 liter, ported head, springs, cams. We had some kind of ported Type R manifold on it. We had about 10.5 or 11-to-1 compression with that displacement. This is an 84 millimeter, and I ran 2 motors. Eventually, one of them was a GSR crank, so an 87.2 millimeter. The other one was an 89 millimeter, and combined with the 84 millimeter bore. With both of those, we were still under the 2 liter designation for G, which is what we raced in. But the cool thing, like I said, about the turbo was that we had a lot more average power production. So in fifth gear, at whatever our starting RPM is, I have to go back and look at the data logging and the gear split, because I have all of that stuff. Before we even put the car and decided to do this, I went through all the specs. So I went through all the gearing charts on all of the available transmissions and all the individual gears, although we didn't switch individual gears, because again, I didn't have the I didn't have the budget to do that. So we just put the LS non-VTEC, GS Integra transmission in there. But one thing I did do eventually, because I was concerned with engine speed, and so you're juggling 2 things here. Like, you're juggling engine speed and the gearing associated to make the speed that you want with that engine speed, but also tire size. So if you get to, like, we could put a tall tire on it, which we ended up running a 26-inch tire on it. But again, that creates problems too. If the tire is too tall, the car is too high, you get all sorts of form drag under the car. You want the car low. We had an air dam on it because the class that we were in, we had a belly pan on it and a rear wing and all that. And in the class that we were in, all of that stuff was not just legal, it was kind of mandatory. So we could do that. But if you put really tall tires on it, then all of a sudden it comes up off the ground. So you have to have the tire size right. So the tire size limitation also becomes part of the gearing. So what I did was I eventually had a final drive made for it. So I think the 440 was the B16 and the 426 was the non-VTEC one. And then I had a 4.0 made so that we could run really high speeds without going to excessive RPM. And I know guys have run that and stuff, but I see lots of guys out there blowing stuff up, and we weren't doing that. We had a fairly conservative tune in it. We had a motor that had run safely at 29 pounds, and we were only running usually 13 or 14 on one of the passes where we set the record. I think it went up to about 17. So it all worked out good. And so my question to you guys is, what have you guys done to build things like a do-it-yourself kind of deal like this VORTECH kit, because it just came out of necessity. I mean, you can keep like banging your head against the wall and going, okay, I can take the 6-rib belt and I can really make it the best possible 6-rib belt transfer shaft kind of thing that's ever been done, and we can make more power than anybody's ever done with this. Yeah, we could do that. And we did. At the time, we were making way more than anybody else because we were the ones that are applying ourselves. Not that anybody couldn't do what we were doing. It's just, you know, bigger pulleys and more speed and idlers and all of the normal stuff that everybody has done for any kind of blower forever. But we were the ones doing it. And then we thought, okay, well, we could keep going this direction, or we could do something different. And so we stepped back and we're like, look, rather than do that, let's just put a blower like closer to the crank, and then we'll just run a tube up to, you know, run to our intercooler. And while we're doing it, we should probably put a better intercooler in it. Hindsight being 2020, that would have been nice. And then once you start thinking, oh yeah, that's kind of a better idea. And then you go, oh, and if we do that, while we're doing that, we should, like, the belt is going to be short. Let's put a cog pulley on it. It'll be like, you know, rigid in every plane, and it'll just, you know, then it starts snowballing. Then you change your train of thought from, okay, let's make a really cool 6-rib system, to let's not do that. Okay, now let's apply all our knowledge and expertise and creative ideas to this new program, and let's do that. So sometimes just, you know, changing direction can be a good idea, and you can get some good results. And we did with that. And then after again, we were doing this only with the VORTECH for a really long time, because we were doing stuff with VORTECH. We wanted to set this record with the guys from VORTECH, and we did, and it did great. And then I started doing turbo stuff, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's this is kind of cool. So let me know what you guys have done. Tell me what kinds of cool things you guys have built, you know, custom deals and stuff. What kind of power is a 4582? I don't know that I've ever tested one. Can a stock LSA bottom end survive at 2650? Yes. But I would put ring gap in it. Richard, I'd like to do a single turbo on a split port 4.2 V6. What would be a good turbo? I'm sure somebody has steered you to a GT3582 for that, for 500 to 600 horsepower. If you want to go more than that, then an S366 or some kind of whole set that I'm sure Tim will tell you about, or you could go up to the GT45. Although I think and although we ran it on the 4200 Atlas motor, and it seemed to work pretty well. You flipped your pistons after adding a blower. Nice. Nicholas, I need a turbo size recommendation. 400 horsepower goal on a 2.5 liter 5-cylinder. Wouldn't mind supporting Precision since they're not far from me. Precision has lots of stuff that will meet those needs. A 60 millimeter or 62 millimeter or something will easily do that. As a matter of fact, the 62, I'm pretty sure it was a 62 that I had that we did a bunch of stuff with, is now going in an Acura NSX, although it's going on a 3.2 liter J series swap that Jimmy's doing in there. I had a 1.3 liter TVS blower. Where did that come on? Now switch to a 5467 turbo on my Turbo Saturn. That should be good with that on that Saturn motor. What are your thoughts on aftermarket racing parts companies and crypto as payment for parts? I think you're going to be hard pressed to get people to accept that, especially a lot of the old school guys. I mean, look at Uncle Tony and them using electric, like EV stuff in Project X. There's a lot of people that are still like that. I've always made my own ram air intakes. Those are good. I remember the first one I did way back in a 77 Camaro. I'm pretty sure that this is the first ram air one that we did. and a 77 Camaro. And what we did was we took it was a slightly oversized because we had enough hood clearance room with the intake that we were using. So it was a fairly tall, sealed, factory style air cleaner. And then we knocked the air inlet off of it. And then I just went to the wrecking yard and found, like, you could find corrugated tubing from air ducts and stuff like that. I just found a length of corrugated tubing that was pretty good size. And I didn't even make a flange for it to clamp it to or anything. I just stuck it in the hole from the other piece that we took off, stuck it in the hole, and then we did a double hole saw drill into the cowl area, and then just stuck that into the cowl area. And I had my cowl induction, because I had seen so many photos back in the day of the cowl inductions that various people like. Like if you look at a 67 Z28 or 68 Z28, look at those and see, like the 69 had it from the hood, but the other ones before that had the cool, super cool, I'm sure those air cleaners too are like $1 million. The super cool air cleaner that had the elbow on it, and then the ducting to go over to the cowl area. We wanted to make that, except that I wanted to make that for like $8 or $9, and that's what we ended up doing. Have you ever done a comparison on blow through carb pads? I actually have. I haven't done a video on it, but I did a test on a couple of different styles, and the styles definitely change what was needed to be done with the carburetor in terms of jetting and stuff. So we use the CSU one on their carburetor normally because we have a good tune for it and it seems to work fairly well. We tried some of the lower profile ones, and those were not great. Built a car that we geared for 220 at the old Riverside track. Wow. Scared the shit out of our driver. Tom, ram air does work, but you have to compensate if you actually have pressure in there. And depending on the speed and the opening and all that, you can get actually positive pressure in there. We were measuring, to give you an idea, we were measuring positive pressure going into our turbo at 200 miles an hour. Not a lot, but some, because the way that the turbo was on a Honda, back behind the radiator, it wasn't a radiator for us because we had a small radiator over to the side. And then we had a block off panel, and then the turbo was mounted, to the side of the block. And then we had a big 4-inch ducting that went around to the front, and then to a big K&N air cleaner, it's about this long and about this big. And so it's giant, and it had no restriction. But all of that stuff was, the whole opening in front of, like, going into the radiator and stuff was all fenced off. So the air couldn't go anywhere. So we would have pressure actually build up there. In fact, we kept reducing the airflow into that area because we never had a cooling problem. So we wanted to, improve aero by reducing the airflow going into there. But we could, we put a pressure tap on the inlet between the filter and the turbo, and we had positive pressure going into the turbo. It wasn't very much, and it was at a really high speed, but we were excited that our fencing and our ducting was actually working. And if you have positive pressure, any kind of positive pressure at all, on a carburetor or on the inlet going into fuel injection, you can make power. Most of the power on any kind of ram air deal comes from the cold air. That's much better and much more important. But positive pressure would also be good. A little icing on the cake. It's like getting a Krispy Kreme donut and then having it be like maple glazed on top of that. Element, the H22 turbo size would depend on what kind of power you want to make. So take a look at some of the turbos that we ran on the K series, and that'll give you an idea, because that's a 2.4. Your H22 is a 2.2, and not making as much power as the K series is. So maybe something slightly smaller, but the GT35 would be good for 500 or 600 horsepower. Or a 3076 or something in between those two might also work for that. Do you believe freezing parts to negative 450 degrees? If you can chill the air going into the motor to negative 450 degrees, that would make a big difference in performance. Bob, you want a separate engine to drive the blower? I don't know how you're wanting to have a whole nother motor in your car, like two motors, and then one of them drives the blower, and then that blower blows into the engine. Or I don't know what you're talking about. $13 to 1 440, 254 260 cam. That's a real cam. Trick flow 240 CNC heads. Yeah, you can add boost, but 13 to 1, you're limited. You know, your tuning window gets really narrow. You can run it on the 85 and add some boost to it, but if I was going to do it, I wouldn't do it on a 13 to 1 motor. Yep, the Chevelle had a flapper cold air. One of the Dodges had the little opening in the hood that came up and had the cool like drawing on it, you know. Yeah, if you Admiral made a comment about think about air blowing into the turbo, it makes it have to work less hard, and that's the way it is with anything. So take a look when we did the compound stuff with the 3800. So we had a turbo blowing into the blower, and that's why the boost goes up, because all of a sudden the blower becomes way more efficient because it has like positive pressure going into the blower. So no longer having to suck the atmospheric pressure air, having positive pressure. It changes things. It makes them a lot more efficient. And you see the same thing even in a simple test like with fuel pumps. When we're doing fuel pump tests and the fuel pump has to draw the fuel like a gravity fed thing, or if you have one pump feeding the other pump, all of a sudden this pump, the flow rate of this pump goes way up. And secondarily, the flow rate of the feed pump also goes up because of the drop in pressure between these two pumps. So it's good stuff. I think if anyone started making cast iron 351 Cleveland blocks, Ford Racing has those, right? Southern Dakota used a vane style smog pump as a supercharger. I always wanted to do that on a lawnmower. Big bang on a 4G63. When are you planning on getting back to the other guys series? I'm always on those. I have 1.5 bar map sensor. If I switch to a 3 bar, well, you're gonna have to retune everything, right? You're gonna have to rescale everything. Because right now, the fuel numbers that you have at the top of your scale are not going to be right when the top of your scale now is 3 bar, because now everything, if you just change the sensor, now everything that you have is going to be reading in the middle. So are all the timing numbers that you have there right for that boost level? Probably not. You'll have to go and rescale everything. What we normally do, like when we do a Holly, if we go from let's say we were going from a 2 bar to a 3 bar. So what we will do to make things easy is we would take we would take like the top 2 rows and then copy those and then start our new file and then put those in where they're going to be 2 bar. And then, we also have all of the 1 bar stuff is there. And then so we can scale up from the 2 bar to another one. Cause all you're doing is you're adding another thing that's, that's starting out at the NA level. You're just adding another one of those on top of it. And that'll usually get you fairly close. And we do the same thing when we're going from NA to boosted. Is we that's why I like to run the NA stuff first, is we can run the NA stuff and go, okay, look, at 100 kPa, this is how much, this is how much fuel it wants, and this is what timing works. So now we know when we go to a 2 bar, it's going to be double that. So it's a good starting point. It's not always that. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a little less, depending how much power you're making. And usually it takes more fuel to get there. but also you have to adjust the timing curve as well. So if we have 29 degrees in, let's say at the power peak, and we're going to want to take away timing at each one of the steps going up in boost. you were knee deep in being awesome. Wow, just knee deep. So it's an easy night then. You can bolt a DSM turbo exhaust manifold to a Honda H22. I didn't know that. The bore centers are the same, and the bolt pattern and all that stuff is the same. Aluminum rod 5.4 Navigator motor. How come you use aluminum rods in it? I love her still. I like what you did there. That's clever. Saw some guys run a drag car and scuba tanks. The guys from CAS, compressed air supercharging, do that. They're kind of scuba tanks, I guess. That's what they use. That's what they used on the dyno when they dyno tested it. But yeah, they've run that and it works really good. It's a very involved throttling mechanism and stuff that they have on there, so it's pretty cool. But yeah, there's no parasitic losses associated with that, because all of the losses are basically in you filling the tanks, which happens off-site away from the engine. So and you have a limited amount of airflow, you know, in your sealed containers. But still, it's really cool. And the other thing is that the charge temperature in that can be below 0. So it's pretty cool. Average Joe, you can heat them. You can drill and use an easy out. So twin turbo supercharged Cobra motor with a ram air designed into the turbos to make an extra 0.3 pounds of boost triple charging. There you go. And you forgot about the nitrous though, right? An electric motor for the blower. That'd be good, except that where's the electric motor going to go? And an electric motor to drive a supercharger that's making any boost or airflow or power, the electric motor is going to be gigantic because the amount of power that it takes to drive a blower. Yeah, the grabber air cleaners. That's what I was thinking of on the Dodge stuff. If you're talking about cryoing, that's what I assumed that you were talking about. I used the opportunity to make a joke. I haven't ever tested cryoing, but people have, and it seems to work. The thing that I don't know is if it does make it better and it does something to the molecular structure or the alignment or the metallurgy, how much does it do? Like if I get to a point where I'm going to break that rod, does it make it 1% stronger? And if it does, is it stronger in tension, in compression, in twist? I mean, in vibration? Does it change the frequency? There's an awful lot there to look at, and I don't normally go into all of this stuff. But if you had to, we could. And those are always the questions. I get people that make statements to me all the time. Oh, well, this does this, and I'm like, well, maybe. But the thing is, for you to determine and actually make that statement, and for the statement to be 100% accurate, it's very, very difficult. The other thing is for you to have that, for you to be able to have that information to make that statement, the testing regimen that you'd have to do to verify that is beyond your ability. And whether it's your ability intellectually or your ability financially, it's because it's an extensive and exhaustive test procedure to figure out what this guy is just haphazardly saying is as an absolute. You could say that all billet wheels are better than cast wheels. Well, that would mean you'd have to test every one of them, and nobody could or would do that. So that's not a universal thing. So you can't make that statement. And it's the same thing with superchargers are better than turbos, or turbos are better than superchargers, and all of these things that people say, that there's no way that you can know that, and there's no way that you have tested that. So before people make statements like that, I would like them to say, in my uninformed opinion, and then they could preface it by doing that. Ooh, a 64 Galaxy with a 352 FE. It would be easy for you to turbocharge that if that's what you wanted to do, or supercharge it. You could supercharge it very easily by adapting a kit that was supposed to go on like a 5-liter Ford. That would be an easy new plate to be able to do that if you wanted to do a supercharger. Then it's just a matter of lining up the crank pulley. You could put because like on the Mustangs, it used to be like with the VORTECH, they would take one of the stock crank pulleys and put it inside the other stock crank pulley with a spacer. And it was that simple. So you could do something like that really easy, and then position the blower so that that pulley would only be driving the blower, and you don't have to worry about the other accessories. You could do it that way. You could easily do a turbo. You could run the stock exhaust manifolds, have them join together in any manner that you want, any manner that fits in your Galaxy, and then mount the turbo somewhere as long as there's room for the exhaust to go back and the discharge to go to a blow-through carburetor or something. It's actually a lot easier than you think. NSM turbo. If you want 550 wheel horsepower, a GT35 is probably not going to do that. And I don't know about the On 376 because I've never actually tested that. If it's a 76 like the CX Racing one or others that are similar, that would do it on a 4.8. A 125 shot will work fine on that. Can you create something like a Venturi with your exhaust out the side of the car? Is that about an aerodynamic question? If it is, if that is your question, the best place to exit the exhaust is out the back, because you want to fill in that low pressure area, because that's what's actually drawing on the car, is the low pressure area behind the car. That's why when you want on the back side of the car, it's best to have it, if you could make your car a teardrop shape. They won't normally let you do that, and they won't let you make it really, really long like we want to do. So you actually want them like converging and have all the airflow come in together like that. So you would eliminate that low pressure area, which is drag. Have you ever tested whether fuel line cool cans add power? They do add power. The guys from Hot Rod did that, or Engine Masters did that. I'm going to redo that test with fuel injection, because I'd like to see, I want to know more about what the fuel temperature is with fuel injection, because it's fairly high pressure. So I kind of want to know what that is. And I'd kind of like to see what that temperature is like driving around. Like how much does it heat up the fuel in the tank? And then what is the fuel temperature while it's being injected? And if we cooled that off by 30, 40, 100 degrees, whatever we think we can do, how much power is it worth? I don't know what a Venturi exhaust is. A 2009 Crown Vic, if it is a 462 valve, it is a PI motor. But yeah, that might be that. What year is that? Did you say? 09? Yeah, I don't know if that's a 3 valve yet or not. I thought 10 was when they did that. Turbo 12 horsepower Briggs & Stratton. Cool. Where did you find a 12 horsepower turbo? An LS4 with a remote turbo, that'll be good. They put tires back on your trailer, or did they take them off for some reason? Oh, they're 350 Windsor with Cleveland mains. Okay. I thought that somebody offered Cleveland blocks. I could be wrong. Yeah, let me know about the information on the Chevelle. AAR, you want to run a compound turbo on an LA318 roller cam engine with a Linati hydraulic roller 219, 227, stock heads, what size turbo? Why do you want to do a compound turbo on that? That would be my question. I would not recommend it on that motor. You're not going to need it. There's not a formula for peak fuel efficiency for engine speed, because there's an awful lot more going on than that that's going to determine your peak fuel efficiency. Your peak fuel efficiency might come at a very slow vehicle speed, because the slower the vehicle, the less aero drag there is, which costs you power. You also have air fuel ratio, rolling resistance, the aero that I mentioned, which you can change a lot of things to change the aero. You want to run the thing as lean as possible, get rid of all of the parasitic losses in the motor, like get rid of the alternator, get rid of the AC, get rid of the water pump, get rid of all of that stuff, because all of that stuff costs you power. Jeremy, the longer S10 would be preferred, because I think it would be more stable. Yeah, there's still a fairly big argument about, did I miss somebody here? Admiral, thank you very much. I missed your thing. Should I go 9.3, 9.8, or 10-1, 10.7 compression on turbo 2 valve? I would stay like at 9.8 is the one I would choose. Sorry, I missed your thing here. Did I miss somebody else's? No, let's go down here. Caravaggio, thanks for the 352 information. Thank you very much. What turbo and carburetor is your pick for a budget beginner like this? We run a CSU blow-through carburetor. I think that there are others. I think Quick Fuel or somebody else has a smaller one, which is what I'd use for that. You might even be able to get away with blowing through a standard Holley and just jet it. Because especially if you're only running 5 or 6 pounds, you can get away with a lot of stuff. The other thing you can do is, if you look at Paxton and VORTECH, they have enclosures that you enclose the carburetor. So you could just put a factory carburetor in there and enclose it, assuming that you have enough fuel flow potential. And then all you have to do is make sure that you have enough fuel pressure from your pump to always have, 6 or 7 pounds of fuel pressure going into the carburetor plus the boost. So if you have 7 pounds of fuel pressure and 7 pounds of boost, your fuel pump has to be able to supply 14 pounds. So you got to make sure that the fuel pump is able to do it, the carburetor can be enclosed, or you could do a bonnet. The bonnet's the easiest way, but the problem is the bonnet requires a good carburetor to do that, and the enclosure doesn't always do that. We've run a lot of standard Mighty Demons and things like that inside these enclosures. The problem with the enclosure is that it's difficult to take it back all apart to do jet changes and things like that. So I do like the having a blow-through carburetor like the CSU one. Oh, they were stealing your trailer. So did you, I'm hoping that you convinced them the errors of their way. How does a compound turbo not make 50 pounds of boost? You can, if that's how you set it up. Is a shorter distance between the turbo and the intake better? I don't think so, because I would much rather have an intercooler and the associated plumbing that goes with that. Now, I think that there may be a response change from that, but none of us are road racing where that might be a concern. Yes, cooler fuel would help prevent detonation. Big Rich, could you imagine making a no holes barred single cylinder? The cool thing is when they do detonation tests, they normally do those tests on single cylinder deals. My mistake, what size turbo to make 500 horsepower? Okay, if you have a single turbo, 500 horsepower on that 318, I still would probably do a GT45 because of the displacement of that motor. You might be able to get away with a GT35 if they have a big enough hot side for that. But I still think you might be a little bit limited. Jeremy, I don't know. There's an ongoing debate on whether you put the truck is more aerodynamic with the tailgate up or down, or the bed. And I know people are going to reference the Mythbusters deal, but they don't drive consistently enough to have given me any information on that. And that comes from a guy that just absolutely like adores the Mythbuster stuff. Both of the guys that are on it were awesome, and I loved all the things. It's just that there's no way anything but a computer and a rolling road could make the cars consistent enough to show you what the actual fuel mileage is. They don't, and especially on an oval like they were driving, that's just not a test that they got right. So I would like to see, where I would like to see this just in a wind tunnel. I'd like to see what's happening, because the problem is on a truck, this is all like a low pressure area back here. If you see what is happening when you're driving down the road without a cover on, you have something in the back. If it's light enough, it'll actually get lifted up. So that's all unaerodynamic area. And so a lot of people think that the air spills over and then flows and then hits a closed tailgate. I honestly don't think that that's happening. I think if it happened immediately, there would just be turbulence there. And now I think that the air doesn't go down in there. I don't think it gets anywhere near there. But maybe it does. Maybe there is a little bit there, and maybe having the tailgate down would be better. Maybe having a tonneau cover would be more aero. But is it more aero to offset whatever weight you would be adding to that? Because that's another thing, because the weight's going to have a different effect than the aero is, because the aero is going to be less effective on the launch and the 60-foot time, and then or make less of a difference there than it would down the track. And then the weight is going to have more of an effect on the initial part of the launch and less of an effect once you're going down the track. I think the weight's probably going to affect it everywhere, but it'd be more pronounced like on the low end part of it, and the aero will be kind of on the big end part of it. I hope you're sufficiently confused now. Yes, Paul, that's one way to get it. It's what you're doing is people compound them because your turbo won't run in the area that you want it to. So with another one, a bigger one, now it will. And also with the smaller one, you can get more dynamic range from that combination. the cam back. The Rotex snowmobile stuff, I watched guys drag race the heck out of those things, even obviously in just on dry land at a drag strip. It was amazing how fast those things were. I'd rather spend the money on WPC treatment for parts rather than cryogenically treated parts. I don't know enough about either one of those. I haven't seen enough testing for me to tell you absolutely one way or the other. And again, even if we said, look, yes, like we were talking about before, cryoing it or other treatments that you would do, change it. But if they change it 1 or 2%, and and you've broken it at 106%, it's not going to do anything. Not very many people I know get to where they break the thing at the 99%, and the extra 2% would have saved it. Most guys would go, when they break something, it's like all in. And I don't know if that's going to help it. Like, does it improve the cycle life? Like, does it add 10% onto the cycle life so that we can run the motor for more 500-mile races if that's what we're doing? I have so many questions about that. And like I said, even if we determine that, yes, it's better, just because it's better, do we need to do that? Like, an aftermarket block for an LS is better, but I don't ever get one of those just because it's better, because it's a lot more expensive. So that's another consideration. And that's a consideration that actually most people would consider. Okay, let's say that it does make it better, and they have 100% believable factual data that, yes, it does make it better. Am I going to do that to my connecting rods or my pistons or my crankshaft or my block? Probably not, if it means that I have to, if I've raised the cost of those things by another $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever the procedure costs. So all of those are other considerations on top of, okay, what does it actually do? What is the gain that we get? And then is the cost to gain ratio in line? There's a lot of stuff going on there. Overbuilt. Thank you very much. Yeah, I do like that. That's kind of my favorite logo, is that Killer Bee thing. Yes, a lot of 2-stroke triples. Those are super cool, like an old Cowie. Paul, you want to say video on turbo plus a Whipple? Just take a look at what we did with the turbo blowing into the roots blower. It's the same thing. A Whipple is a twin screw, so it's going to be more efficient than a roots blower is, but it's the same process though. So you got the turbo, the blower makes everything have more immediate power, and then the turbo takes over and helps the supercharger where it becomes inefficient. The thing about a Whipple all by itself, it's already going to be pretty good. I like the guys at Moto IQ. That's Mike, right? Mike Kojima. I like Mike. RS250. 100 horsepower on the tires. That's pretty nice. Wheelbase media. We have tested different collector sizes, designs, and lengths, and they have a dramatic effect on power. There isn't a universal thing. We've seen as a matter of fact, we had the guys from Burns come in, not me, but they came in doing testing at VORTECH. And sometimes you hit on a combination with the exhaust and it works really well. And they had to fight and scratch to duplicate the results of an existing header with their adjustable deal. So, you know, there's some kind of combination that's going to work really well for that of merge design and length and diameter and all that. And it's going to work really well with the existing cam timing and stuff. But the problem is you have to usually work really hard to figure that out. And it's a lot of trial and error. And I know that they have really good software and stuff, but even with that coming in, it still was a lot of changes and fitments to make the kind of power that they wanted to make. Paul, if you want to see more compound stuff, take a look at all the diesel stuff. That's all compound. As a matter of fact, they probably have triple compound stuff, so it's even crazier. The 16-volt stuff is nice, if only because it improves the efficiency of all of the electric pumps and stuff. So your fuel pump will flow a lot more, water pumps flow a lot more. As long as your computer will like the 12-volt stuff and your injector drivers and all of that is like, you know, gets really excited. Aaron, stock 5-liter with a 70mm turbo and good supporting mods, 550 rear wheel at 11 pounds on a stock Explorer motor. Does it have it has to have a cam or something in it to make that power at that boost level? $37 of boost on a 12 valve. That's cool. Let's see. Really want to put turbo on my 543 valve. If you still have a cam, please put it up somewhere. I don't have any of those here. The only way I could get it to you is I'd have to mail it to you. John, I'm not sure how to do that. I've been asked that before, and maybe that's something I can look into. I've never tried to do a do-it-yourself kind of thing to convert a carb to a blow-through carburetor, a standard carburetor to a blow-through carburetor. We have used standard carburetors in blow-through applications. Like I ran a blow-through 500 two-barrel, the 5512, on the, I think I did that on the 292 Chevy, and we just put lots of jet in it and then, you know, blew through it with E85, and that seemed to work fairly well. But it's not something I was driving around. Yeah, we think that there is a performance benefit from a fuel cooler. I just need to test that. North Carolina's in the house. The 5.4s do have a forged crank. Yes, the 5.4s do. Have you ever dynoed a Mazda rotary? Only on the chassis dyno. Are you listening, Dan? The mod motors don't need steel cranks. We've never broke a cast crank. Will a functional 4-inch cowl hood help at all with heat on its small roots? It will, if it helps you get air to the carburetor. That's what I would be concerned with. Brian, that sounds like a cool combination in the Cutlass. 2 turbos from an Audi, feeding into a Garrett diesel turbo for a burnout car. Cameron, what is a good air fuel ratio for best gas mileage increasing down the freeway? I can tell you in my Civic VX, it was 19-1. But that motor was designed for that. Most of them will run down, at stoic at 14.7 or maybe 15, depending on how they're tuned. The leaner you can get it and have the thing still run at that speed and load and stuff, and actually if you could put a little more throttle angle in it, would get even better fuel mileage. But the leaner that you can get it at that speed, the better mileage that you'll get. The problem is you start getting into a misfire problem, which is why in the Civic they had mixer motion built into the way that they did the camshaft. Yeah, a cowl pan, Rocky, would work good, just to make sure that it gets cold air. So Global Media, what did they say is the benefit of either one of those? Jeremy, happy to help with the 6-liter stuff. Sorry to hear about the 5.3. Yeah, I think direct injection probably would be good for fuel mileage too, because especially if you can combine high compression, which will help you. And then you would definitely do sequential, obviously. And grabbing the next gear. If you're driving down the freeway, I'm assuming that you're already in the highest gear that you have. And that's the other thing that Civic had, is it had ultra low gearing, especially for a little 4-cylinder. Brian, is that a question for me? I thought I talked about compounds already. Yeah, variable cam is a good way to help too. Yes, if you can get more throttle opening, that definitely helps. When are you getting your Ameribearer from Calvin? Why would I be getting one from Calvin? I already have two of them. That's the first, Tim, on my Honda, that's the first thing that I bought was a boost gauge. Because every Civic has to have a boost gauge right up in the pillar pod. But I use it for vacuum because you can tell while driving when you're in the super economy mode, and you can keep that in a range in the vacuum range and keep it there. And you can also see when you go out of it. I mean, you can feel it when it goes into power enrichment mode. Basically, I mean, when it goes from ultra lean burn to normal stoic, you can feel it change. And then when you go into, if you go into more throttle, you can feel it, and it goes into VTEC. Obviously, you can feel that. So you get a lot of things going on. But and I do it all the driving based on vacuum. Unfortunately for this, and it's counterintuitive for what you would really want to do, but the more vacuum you have, the better the fuel mileage is. Now, it would be better if it weren't the case, but when the computer senses load, then it goes out of this lean burn. So you have to keep it in that load range, which is a vacuum number, basically. What were we talking about getting from him last night? I wasn't getting anything from him. I was just doing an update on the video that he was posting, because he ran I don't know, 25 or 26 pounds on his 06 motor, and also ran cams with it. He ran the Snyder regrind cams and made a bajillion horsepower with it. So that's what I was talking about last night with Calvin. I have an 05 and an 06. I haven't done anything on the Barras recently. What's the benefit of having a larger turbine wheel over a larger compressor wheel? You don't pick one or the other. Cameron, I think I have to do a turbocharged Iron Duke just so that we can show that the Iron Duke is maybe the best motor ever made. Joseph Davidson, you want to do a dual quad intake with 2 turbos? Yeah, you need to do that. Powder metal connecting rods work good. We see that with the LS stuff all the time. Look how much power we made with them. So they obviously work. I mean, they're not a forged rod like you get from the aftermarket, but honestly, we made 1,500 plus horsepower with them in a Gen 4 version. That's beyond what most people are running around with. Evan, the VXs did have high knock counts, which is why they were not allowed to run in California. The California version of the VX didn't have lean burn. Only the 49 state cars did, which is what mine was. And mine was high on the NOx counts when we would smog it also. I know you've done tons of 5-liter Explorer motor combos, heads and intakes, but have you done a build with the best package, meaning stock Explorer short block, add the best? First of all, there's no best cam and heads for that. That's all subjective. So wherever you want to make your power, you're going to choose the camshaft and cylinder head and intake manifold accordingly. So you just have to tell me kind of what kind of power you would want to make, and I can tell you what to do with that 5-liter, because I've run hundreds and hundreds of those. Thoughts on cam duration for boost? I don't know how to answer that question. You need cam duration. The camshaft will do what the camshaft does on the NA motor, whatever that is, whatever specs you've made on your cam, and then boost will add to that. So there's no, you stop thinking about cams for turbos or cams for blowers or cams for nitrous. Think about the cam, whatever it does, and then you add boost on top of that. If you have a cam that has lots of duration and it's soft down low and wants to make peak power at a high RPM, it's still going to do that under boost. Definitely going to turbocharge the 360 Magnum. Free valve in the aftermarket. I know. Are they going to do that? I do want to do a 4-liter Jeep motor, but that's down the road. Yeah, Terry, that's a good idea. A vacuum gauge is really good, is a useful tool for tuning stuff, especially carbureted stuff. Jacob, all of the low buck turbos that I bought have all lasted a really long time. The CX Racing stuff we still have from the original Big Bang motor. That was back in 2010. The DNA stuff that we have, the GT45s. I have some max speeding stuff. I haven't had those as long, but all that stuff seems to have worked. Was free valve used on a Ferrari Formula One motor? Yeah, Brian, that actually might be a good application, huh? The 3800 on the little 4.3 liter V8. We've run these low dollar turbos at Bonneville, all kinds of stuff. They did try that. They did try solenoid operated valves, but that's not the same thing as what we have now. I don't see your original question, Maury. Trying to look back for it. Do they undersize the bearings and shafts? I don't know. I don't have problems with the turbo, so I don't know what you're talking about. Opinion on Shelby GLHS is love them. I like the Omnis the best. People like Chargers and other things too. I almost bought a Spirit RT. Long or short tube headers for an 0946. Long tube headers will make more average power than a shorty header will. The reason that they didn't continue with trying to operate the valves the way that they were going, especially with electric solenoids, is they couldn't close the valves. They couldn't close them fast enough, especially for the speed that they were running. Yeah, Terry, 1300 RPM. That's nice to be able to do that. Yeah, Mark Donahue did the development work for the Porsche IROC stuff. So Nick, you're working on adapting an M90 to a VORTECH 4.3 liter. That's a good application, and modifying the blower for a draw through. I saw somebody online did that. Maybe I should try that. Tim, that statement again, like we were talking about earlier, you would have to actually go to all of those factories and test all of the tolerances of all of those turbos to know that they're different or that they're not the same. And there's no way any of us have done that. So that there's no way that you can know whether that statement is true. Yeah, Evan, a lot of that stuff is, the smoking and stuff. You would blah blah. It's these cheap turbos. No, it's the fact that you were giving it way too much oil. You were giving it 25 or 30 or 100% more oil than it needed and that it could deal with. And then once you do the right thing to it, hey, look, magically the turbo just works the way it's supposed to. What do you have to modify on a supercharger to make it a blow through? You're going to blow through the carburetor with a supercharger? That's going to be more a function of the carburetor rather than the blower, unless you're talking about making it a draw through where you're drawing the fuel through it. I don't think you have to do anything to it. I think the M90 will do that. Yeah, I know they were Formula One was using compressed gas. I think somebody earlier said it was nitrogen. And then they had tried in development, they had tried electric solenoids, and they just didn't have, you couldn't make a solenoid that was strong enough to do that. Whatever happened to rear mount turbos on C5s and Gen 4 Camaros? What happened to them? Did they all disappear or something? Jacob, I don't have an answer for how much ultimate power that a 354 volt will take. How can I put a TBS intake on my LQ4? It will bolt right on in place of the other one. With a cam, what would be the best injectors? It depends on how much power you're wanting to make. You would choose the injector based on the power output. A cam, obviously, and springs are easy. With the LQ or with the Trailblazer SS, you're going to need that throttle body. I don't know if you have a drive-by-wire or if you have a manual throttle body. The opening in that manifold is bigger than it is in the early truck one, so you're going to have a throttle body that goes with it. But otherwise, it bolts on. You might have to figure out some of the vacuum line routings and stuff, and EGR and stuff might be a little different. We don't ever deal with any of that. The manifold just bolts on when we're doing the test. A stock 4-bolt will start breaking at 600 horsepower. Yeah, Rich, I remember reading about the active suspension stuff that they were doing. Basically, they were doing that to keep the active aero working. Hot boy, Richard, waiting for my tune on my SR22 DET. Very cool. Yes, 2-turbo coupe turbos, the little T3s on a 351. Those are good. A lot of people did that after. I think Evan did a story on that back in Muscle Mustangs where they put 2 of those turbos on a 302. The fuel rail for the Trailblazer SS is going to be specific to that intake manifold. The fuel rail for the truck manifold will not work on that on the Trailblazer. Big Rich, man, we'll see you. The guys at CSU have a blow-through 1050, or I don't know what size it is. It's at least a 1050. It's a 4500 Dominator style carburetor, because Mike Miller, he brings a lot of really high-end drag racing motors there, and he's got a VORTECH on a couple of them, and he's got a Dominator that's a CSU deal that they run. Scotty, I think I've done part throttle stuff on the chassis dyno, but not on an engine dyno. I think it's a good idea. A part throttle dyno pull is not going to tell you anything about drivability, because you're not going to, at a part throttle pull, we're still going to run from whatever the low speed is, let's say 2000 to 6000 RPM. Part throttle at 6000 RPM is not going to tell you anything about drivability, because all the drivability stuff is, I mean, if you're anything like me, you're driving around at whatever the lowest speed that the motor is, 1000 RPM or 1500 RPM or whatever, up to 2500 RPM is kind of where all the drivability, when you're just driving around town. And that's all part throttle and varying part throttle. Actually, I'm never like at a, well, I guess you could be at a consistent part throttle and just have it drive like that. But usually you're trying to get, zoom in and out of people and, cut people off. And all right, I8. An LY5. I don't know. I mean, if it's an LS motor, then it's good for boost. So any of those are. Okay, last question. Utah County. Let's see. Wait, wheelbase media. Utah County, you got your 99 Z28, 4 PSI, 450, 491 at 6 PSI. Nice. So 212, 218. That cam should be good. Wheelbase, you'll get the last one. Thank you. I8, good luck. You make sure you get some sleep, man. Did you ever run into problems with crankcase ventilation capacity under boost? We run into crankcase capacity ventilation on LS motors all the time, and we cure it all the time every time we run them because they don't have enough PCV system on them. We don't want to draw the PCV back into the motor, so we vent it to atmosphere. So all of the fittings, the fitting on the valve cover by the adjacent to the fill neck. Sometimes there's one on a Gen 4 motor in the valley cover. There's usually one over on the passenger driver's side valve cover. Yes, driver's side valve cover. And the one on the driver's side valve cover, usually a lot of times, like if you get an LS3, is a very small nipple with a, like a valve in it, and we take that thing off immediately. We take that valve cover off and just replace it. So we put a valve cover in it that has a big hole in it. It has a baffle, and then we run a grommet and then a fitting and a big piece of rubber hose that we run to the back of the dyno. So that breathes back there, and then we have another line that comes off the one on the other, the small one that comes off the one on the other side. If we have a valley cover one, we also run that and just tie that together with the other ones. We just let them breathe. The good thing is that you're getting rid of that crankcase ventilation, which is good because you can see it will get unhappy if you have that stuff all capped because it won't like that at all. But the other cool thing is it, and sometimes we don't route the line all the way to the back. Somebody will have it just sticking straight up, and we'll zip tie it, and then we can see if the thing has blow by. So if we're running, a lot of boost, we hurt something or whatever, we're like, oh yeah, that thing is like puffing like a freight train, then we know that something is going on. So it gives us an indicator. But we can also see, hey, look, the thing's happy, it's running, it doesn't have a lot of blow by, and that's especially the case with, I start with a lot of junkyard motors, obviously. So that's kind of a good indication. We have that set up on there, and it works really well. I don't like to draw that stuff back into the motor. Tom, what's up? Is crankcase ventilation the same as a steam kit? No, it's not. But that's something I've never paid attention to, the steam kits, and I probably should, especially when we're running a lot of power. You have a stage 3 PDS blower cam. That's pretty good size. If you're wanting to max out that blower on a 417, you could go to a stage 4. The drivability is going to be worse, but if you're trying to get the most horsepower, I think that blower, an LS9 blower, will support 800 horsepower, right? You have a big inlet going into the blower. I'm hoping like a giant size throttle body, a giant size inlet, everything that you can do to make sure that you don't have a restriction going into that blower. And that becomes more and more important the faster that you spin it. So giant size throttle body, like giant size inlet, all of that. And then you can make a lot of power with that camshaft. But on a 417, I need to look at what's the intake. If you let me know what the intake duration is on the stage 3 cam. I'm just not that familiar with the blower cam. DJKR, supercharger. This is a good, and this will be the last question. Supercharger belt versus parasitic loss versus turbo back pressure. Are they comparable and a properly sized system? Eaton and Whipple claim the turbo back pressure offsets horsepower loss to spin the blower on a straight pipe exhaust. That's 100% not true. So if you have a blower size to make, let's say 700 horsepower, it can be whatever number you want, 1,000 horsepower. The bigger the number, the more that's going to be offset toward the turbo anyway. So if you have a 700 horsepower turbo and a 700 horsepower blower, you're not going to have a lot of parasitic loss associated with driving a 700 horsepower blower, or not a lot. you'll have less than you would to drive a 1,000 horsepower blower. The closer that you get to the maximum speed and maximum flow rate, presumably maximum boost pressure, depending on what your NA combination is doing, the more you're asking that blower to do, the less efficient it's going to be, and the greater the parasitic loss. If you take a look at all of the tests that I have up, I have 3 of them up that show you exactly what you're asking there. I have one on the modular Ford, one on a B16 Honda, and then one on a 5-liter-ish Ford, where we ran a blower and a turbo and another kind of blower and another kind of blower in the case of the modular Ford. And a supercharger at any given boost level always makes more power than a blower does. Because to give you an idea, I'll give you an extreme example. An Eaton, a TVS blower, like a 2650, if you spin it at 20,000 RPM and ask it to, it's 20,000 RPM and 20 pounds of boost, and I'd have to find out what the flow rate was. The flow rate was very high. It was almost 300 horsepower to drive that blower. And you'll never have 300 horsepower with a back pressure on a turbo, not ever. So that gives you an idea. Whenever we've done this comparison with a turbo and a blower, the turbo always makes more power at any given boost level because it doesn't have that. And also, most turbos, if you take a look at what they do in terms of how efficient they are in terms of charge temperature at any given boost level, it's going to be lower. It's usually lower than the superchargers are, the discharge air. So, and I don't dislike superchargers. I like them. They work very well. I like Eaton stuff. The TVS blower, I think, is a giant home run for those guys because it takes care of 1,100 or even 1,200 horsepower on down, which is 95% of the market. So that's a home run for them. Whipple makes bigger blowers. Kenny Bell, other guys make bigger blowers, but that's much less of the market. So I think that it's a really good choice and it works well. It doesn't make what turbos make. If they would allow you to run 20 pounds with that and 20 pounds with 2 turbos or a single turbo, the turbo would make a lot more power. I would be surprised if it wasn't 100 horsepower more than the blower is. And thank you guys for showing up. I could keep going all night, but thank you guys for showing up. The video that I'm putting up now is power adder stuff on the LS, which is really cool. So we have a nitrous setup where we ran a 5.3 from the junkyard and ran a 300 shot on it, which is cool. And then a 383 stroker 5.3 with a 671 carbureted, roots blower on it. And then the turbo, I included the comparison that I did S475 versus S480 on a 6-liter, so that everybody once again can complain that I didn't do this test rate, which I didn't, and I fully admit to that, so I know that going in. But that video should go up tonight. Thank you guys all for showing up. I will see you all tomorrow.